The March 25th, 1992 broadcast of Later with Bob Costas featured two baseball announcers, one a PA announcer for the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbett Field, the other Bob Costas, who's on the show every night. Most people wouldn't guess that John Forsythe's entry into the entertainment business and acting was becoming the PA announcer for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he spends half this 22-minute episode discussing that with Bob, to Bob's baseball love and glee. Tomorrow, or the next day in 1992, but tomorrow I'll share the follow-up episode where he talks more about acting.
Thanks for staying up later. These days, John Forsythe is appearing in the new Norman Lear comedy, The Powers That Be, Saturday nights on NBC. And if you know him from that, that's fine. And if you know him as Blake Carrington on Dynasty, that's one thing, or the voice on Charlie's Angels. And we may get to all that, but there are some things about John Forsythe I'm guessing most of you don't know. And let's go way back to your days in the late 1930s as the PA announcer, I guess,
yes,
at Ebbett Field,
yes,
at the Brooklyn Dodgers.
I was in my junior year in North Carolina, and I got an opportunity through a fellow that I knew in New York who was a friend of Larry McPhail's, who just moved to the Dodgers. And they were looking for a public address announcer. Me being a baseball nut, knowing everybody's statistics, mother's name, shoe size, uncle's name, and crazy about baseball, they didn't have to offer me a lot of money to lure me away from school. And as a result of that, I fell into quite a remarkable kind of job. Red Barber had just come from Cincinnati with McPhail at that point. And he didn't want to do any of the exotic field things that they had on the show. They were not doing well at the gate, so they'd have Jesse Owens racing a thoroughbred racehorse around the bases before 35 or 40,000 people. Babe Didrikson hitting 9 irons from home plate into a fireman's net in center field. And Red Barber, quite rightly, didn't want to do it, so it fell to me. And it was wonderful, you know, for a 19-year-old kid in front of all those people to have to describe that kind of stuff and make it interesting, because sometimes it was not interesting.
Now, here's something that's going to surprise people, because they take a look at you, and although I guess I can say it, you're 74 years old.
I'm not going to tell you. A lot of women take me for 50. The other night, one took me for 100. So,
but you know, ladies and gentlemen, so for a guy who looks as youthful as you, it seems strange to say, but you knew Babe Ruth, or at least you met him, right?
Yes, I did.
He was a coach with the Dodgers after he finished playing.
That's right. He had always had a secret yen to be a manager. And he was hoping, I'm sure, because he never said anything to me about it, but I'm sure he was hoping to be the manager of the Yankees. The Yankees would have no part of that. And he went to Pittsburgh, and he went to Boston. And finally, in 1938, with Burley Grimes, who was the manager there, teetering on the brink of losing his job, I think they convinced him that he had a shot at being the manager of the Dodgers. And so he came as the coach of the team. Remarkable state of affairs, you know. Leo DeRocha was the shortstop, and Leo was domineering and aggressive and exciting ball player, and he too wanted to be the manager of the Dodgers, so there was a real conflict between the two.
And they had been roommates at one time with the Yankees.
That's right.
DeRocha eventually did become the manager of the Dodgers.
That's right, he did. There was also some, now that Leo is gone, and of course Babe died in 1948 or something, I think, Babe was a real hostile guy when it came to DeRocha, because he accused him of stealing his watch and stealing his wallet when DeRocha played on the same team with Babe Ruth in 1927. So there was a real hostility between them, which ended up in a big fight underneath the right outside the Dodgers dressing room, right underneath the stands at Ebbett's Field.
DeRocher must have been giving away 75 pounds.
Yeah, but he was tough. He knew how to handle himself. He was a great pool shooter. He was a great, graceful and wonderful athlete. And apparently he knew how to duke it out because I think I didn't see the fight, but the consensus of opinion was that he had won the fight.
Didn't I read somewhere that you overheard the Babe telling these raunchy stories about his exploits?
That was one of the most heartbreaking days of my life. You know, 19 years old, baseball freak and nut that I was, to hear, I didn't even think for one that baseball players went out with girls and they smoked cigarettes and all that kind of, I wouldn't believe that.
Certainly not. Up at 6,
no.
some brief calisthenics,
That's
you know, to kind of brace the body, and then some Ovaltine maybe.
Right, and go to the Christian Science reading room afterward and bone up on the Daily News and all. To be sitting down on the corner of the Dodgers bench the day that Babe Ruth came to the Dodgers was a remarkable thing because, you know, ball players, they're always chattering, talking, kidding around, making jokes and whatever. There was silence. And this great man came out of the path from the dressing room, and everybody just kind of stood and looked and listened, and me above all. I was all ears at what was going to be said down on the other end. Whereupon he began to talk about how baseball had changed in this great rumbly voice and this legend that sat there.
Yeah.
Baseball, he said, was not like it used to be. He said, 1927, when he hit 60 home runs, he said he had 30, 40 hot dogs a day, used to drink a fifth of whiskey, and my eyes got wider and wider, and all the ball players too, you know, because they may not have gone to the reading room, and they may not have been the choir boys that I thought that they were, but nobody drank that kind of booze, and nobody ate the number of hot dogs, and all my castles that I had built came crumbling down as I was listening to this.
But no one obviously had a constitution like this guy. Nobody could be built like him and play like he did. Nobody could consume and carouse and abuse the body and go out and perform like that, so none of the rules applied to him.
My feeling is that he would not have been as good if he hadn't had those hot dogs and that amount of booze.
Probably not.
Right.
I mean, his body required unique nourishment.
Right. Of which he partook of plenty.
So now you're a young man, early 20s. When does the acting bug bite, and how do you get into it? Well,
baseball I was with the Dodgers for 3 years. Baseball was a highly, that seasonal occupation. It's summertime, spring, summer, and somewhat into the fall. And the rest of the year is winter. And I loved to eat in the winter, and I wondered what the devil was I going to do. I thought of becoming a writer when I was in school. I was an English major. I don't think I was quite good enough. I thought of becoming a sports announcer, a play-by-play man. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I was quite good enough for that. So I decided that maybe I'd try radio acting, which is somewhat akin to what I was doing on the public address announcing system. And also, too, I'd gained a great deal of poise and experience having done those exotic descriptions that I did.
Yeah.
I went to a friend of mine who put me in touch with a man who was doing radio work, and he said, of course, he said, I'd be happy to have you audition. And I said, well, that's grateful to you for that. I said, what is an audition? He said, that's something you do, you choose some material and you come and do it and act it, and he said, I'll let you know whether you can do radio or not. Well, I puzzled over what I could possibly do, remembering things that I had studied in school, like Cyrano de Bergerac, Eugene O'Neill, play of Eugene O'Neill's. With all the great wisdom of a 20-year-old, decided to go with Cyrano de Bergerac, which was my first mistake. And not having any talent for acting, not having done it, there I was in front of a microphone doing this soliloquy, this great soliloquy. And when I was finished, there was a long pause, maybe a minute. And finally, this fellow, Ted Cott, he said, John, he said, you got a minute? I said, yeah, sure. He said, let's go have a cup of coffee. That sounded ominous enough. But when he took me down, he said, you know, you got a good voice. He said, you like baseball, don't you? I said, yeah, I love it. He said, you think you have a future in it? I said, I don't know. He said, I think you should stick with it. And I said, what, that bad? He said, not only that bad, you don't have any talent whatsoever. He said, he said, I've had 10, 15 years in radio. I've heard thousands of auditions. That is the worst I'd ever heard. He said, I'm telling it to you softly. And I said, So, thank you very much. And I thanked him and left. And I walked home. I was living uptown with 3 other guys. And I walked home, and as I was walking home, I got angrier and angrier. I said, damn, that's not right. I said, I have no training. I have no nothing. You can't assess whatever I did in the light of thousands of other guys who do have some background. He shouldn't have done that. And maybe I am that bad, but let me try it. Yeah, John, why don't you try it? So I've talked myself into studying with somebody. And then I got to like it. So I went out with a Shakespearean company. I went out with a children's theater company. I drove a truck. I put up the scenery, all those kind of things, and really got involved in it. And I think, and Ted Cott, who was a lovely, lovely guy, first time I got starred on Broadway, it was 1950, 51, when I replaced Hank Fonda in Mr. Roberts. Mm-hmm. He came backstage and said, see, I told you couldn't act.
People used to refer to you as a younger Henry Fonda. They saw similarities between you and Fonda, at least in the 1950s, right?
Yeah, I think it was a ridiculous comparison, really, because we may have had some similarity in features, or maybe because I'm tall and loose-limbed or whatever, and he was tall and loose-limbed. But he was a great, great actor, and he was an extraordinary guy, and he was much more country boy than I am. I think I was much more citified, if there is such a word, than Hank was. We got to be good friends after a while, but he was kind of like a big brother to me.
We were looking back over some of the research, and the legendary theater critic, the old-time theater critic Brooks Atkinson, really lauded your performance in Tea House of the August Moon.
Yeah.
Now, again, people sit here and they see Blake Carrington or whatever, and that's a certain kind of performance. But my point is that this goes back some 40 years. That was a real credential as a stage performer.
Yes, it was. And it was the first show that I had done and been starred in on Broadway that I had created. That was a big feather in my cap, and it meant a good deal to me, too. Because, as I said, I was overly sensitive to the fact that that Hank Fonda had preceded me in that. Tea House of the August Moon was a very, very big success. We played it. I played it for about 3.5 years, and it went on for another 1.5 years after I played it.
Now, you closely observed Fonda. You were part of the original Actors Studio with people like Brando and Montgomery Clift. I guess Patricia Neal was in there,
yes.
And Carl Malden. The list goes on.
Eli Wallach.
Yes. And yet I've seen you quoted as saying, I wasn't touched by the hand of God in terms of talent. I'm a good actor. know my craft, give my best effort, but I have no jealousy of those who have greater talent. I stand back and admire it.
Yes.
Was that an accurate quote, or does it sum up how you feel?
No, that's largely the way I felt. Some of us are journeymen. Some do have that inordinate talent that enables them to lift ordinary, commonplace theater to very, very high levels. And others of us do good work and hard work and try, but don't have that extraordinary thing. Marlon Brando, the first time I saw him was at the studio. He had the quality that you observe when you look at an animal in the zoo, an ape of some kind, that looks right at you, you know, unselfconsciously looks at you. It's extraordinary because it's so compelling.
$1,000 for girl steals boy, huh? Well, that's more than Crowley makes for abusing us one whole year. How about Julian, what's his name? Does he go too?
I'm afraid not. The studio just wanted me. Well, it's $250 a week from now on, starting a week from Wednesday.
America, God save His grace.
Now, when we talk about the early days of TV, I'm not talking in this case about Bachelor Father in the late 1950s. I'm talking about the 40s and one of the very first commercial television shows ever done.
Yes, it was a show on NBC. It took place down on the 6th floor here. What they did was they took a radio studio and put about 15 sets in it. We did a play called Miracle in the Rain, written by Ben Hecht, about a soldier meeting a girl and somebody else. There were about, at that point, there may have been 10 or 15 television sets, public television sets in the whole of New York. And my mother, who was loved drama, loved theater, and loved me, wanted to see the show. And I said, well, Mom, I really don't know where you could see it. There's just no place. I mean, they have a control room and they have a tiny little studio. And she said, well, there must be sets in New York. I said, I don't know. I'll find out. They said that on 3rd Avenue, there were about 7 or 8 saloons that had them, where guys used to watch the wrestling for most part, and Dumont shows. That they had Steve Allen on the show. And one. She said, well, that's where I'm going to go. I said, you're going to go into the saloon and watch it? She said, yes, indeed, I am. I said, okay, but be careful, huh? And the night that it went on, she waltzed in and sat down. She said, the bartender said, what would you like to have? She said, well, the first thing I would like to do before I order anything is I'd like very much to turn off the wrestling, and would you mind, all you nice gentlemen, turn the... There's the middle of a big bout with guys pulling, tugging. They said, hey, lady, this is good stuff, lady. And she said, yes, but my son is coming on the air. He's going to be on a show on NBC, a good dramatic show. And they said, well, oh, all right, we'll see if we like it. And so they turned it on, and she ordered, she wasn't a drinker or anything, she ordered a Manhattan, which she sipped at for the hour duration. And the guys, they were watching the show, and she said, and pretty soon the whole bunch, including the bartender, not bothering to serve, wait, everybody, they were all watching the show. And when it was all finished, they said, hey, lady, hey, that's a good show. Yeah, thanks. We did better than the wrestling. And television at that time was a different bag entirely. It was very experimental. We did it on kinescope. There was no tape, so you couldn't stop. And that brought about some interesting things as well for the actors.
What's the biggest screw-up that you had to just smooth over and keep on going?
Biggest screw-up for me was I was playing a baseball player in one of the things, I believe it was on the Philco Playhouse, and I had to change and get from a baseball uniform into a dinner jacket, and there must have been about 1 minute's time. So as soon as I got off camera, there were 2 or 3 people helping me, catching the things. I threw them to them, and bringing pants for me to get into and shoes for me to get into, and I didn't make it. It was 1 minute, and here I was supposed to be in the center of this suave bunch, and be suave myself, and I didn't have the dinner jacket on. And I knew that I had to say something. You had to ad-lib something. And I said, well, gosh, it was awful hot in here, wasn't it? It's getting cooler now. I think I'll put my coat on. Great line, you know, wonderfully colorful, interesting, fascinating, no cowardice kind of line. But it served its purpose, and it was something that I had thought about. I said, if I'm not going to make it, I have to have something to say. So it enabled me to do that. But other actors were caught when they were supposed to have been killed. They were caught, you know, in a crumpled death position, and then they'd wake up, and the camera would be on them. It had not gone off, and they'd get up, and then they'd fall back again.
Well, it's just a spasm.
Yeah.
You know, just kind of an involuntary thing. They're clinically dead, but they just have a spasm, that's all.
Yes, there were a lot of spasms.
Time for Good Night, but the next show, John Forsythe is back to talk about a bunch of other stuff. See you later.